Good morning and welcome to this webinar presented by Trigg Minerals. We're joined today by Trigg's Managing Director, Booyzen, and Chief Geologist, Jonathan King. Today's webinar will provide a detailed overview of the exploration target defined for Trigg's Antimony Canyon project in Utah, USA. I'll now hand you over to Andre.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us on this chilly Tuesday morning. So I'll jump right into it. So great news about our recent announcement on the exploration. I won't talk too much about that. Jono will take you through that in a bit more detail in a few minutes' time. So I just want to confirm things that we've actually announced already. It's a Darouge company out of Denver, well-known consulting company. We've engaged them to do our JORC mineral resource estimate for us, and they've started work on that. The geophysics on the ground, the guys should be on the ground this week, starting with the geophysics, and hopefully that won't take too long, and we'll get some really positive results out of that. And also our assay results. So if you remember a month ago, or more than a month ago, we had some guys on the ground doing some extensive sampling for us over the whole area, and those assays have gone into a local assay lab, accredited assay lab in the US. And we're hoping to get those assay results out pretty soon, and obviously the market will hear about those when we get them. So coming back to our recent raise, that went really, really well. Obviously that's closed now. The shares have been issued. I just want to thank the guys at GBA in Sydney and Roth out of New York for helping us with that. It went very smoothly, and in the end turned out very well for us. So there's a few things happening in the background at the moment with the company, and again, we'll announce those when we're ready. So soon we'll be doing an agreement with a very well-known group in the USA, and they're going to help us engage with some of the US politicians and US authorities, and hopefully get us on the road to getting some US funding as well. We've been still speaking to some investment banks in New York regarding our listing over there later this year, and I'm happy to say that things are progressing very well in that area as well. We've also advancing our smelter strategy, as we mentioned previously. So hopefully we'll have that finalized pretty soon in terms of the strategy, and get an agreement signed off with an international smelting company. We're also going to be bringing on board some more expertise into the Trigg team, and just watch the space for that. And pretty soon we'll be starting getting feet on the ground on site as well in Utah, doing some community engagement. We're going to start some environmental studies, developing some limited site infrastructure to help us with our pilot work, and obviously engaging with some of the local authorities. So really exciting times ahead for us, for all of us, including our shareholders who are along for the ride with us. And as always, the board, the team at Trigg, we're all fully engaged and extremely impatient in what we're trying to achieve. If you just look back in the couple of months that we've had the Antimony Canyon project, we've actually achieved a huge amount, and we're going to keep going full steam ahead of that. So just again, thank you guys for your support, and thank you for joining us today. And John, I'm going to hand over to you.
Good one, thanks, Andre. Okay, before I launch into a discussion around the exploration target that we released yesterday, I just want to acknowledge Craig Richards at GeoCloud Analytics, who did a fantastic amount of work for us and was just a huge asset. And I'm very appreciative to Craig for the effort he put in for us. And also Jacob Anderson at Darouge. As Andre said, we have engaged Darouge, and Darouge helped us with the geostatistics that we incorporated into the model. So this is the target. We believe that we've got between 12.8 to 15.6 million tonnes at a grade between 0.75% to 1.5% antimony. And really the amount of contained metal is potentially substantial. And I think by the end of this chat, you'll see that it's actually potentially significantly higher still. Just a quick reminder that as it's an exploration target, it is conceptual in nature. And we have used the information, the historical information by the USBM, so the US Bureau of Mines, and the geological mapping by the USGS, the US Geological Survey, to help constrain the model. So the key justifications, and as I said, we are geologically constrained. We used that information, we validated that information. We geo-referenced the information, digitized it, and then essentially with Craig, we built these models that you can see in the diagram to your right-hand side. And that allowed us to, or directed our interpretation. The key thing I want to point out in this model is you can see a fault line that divides these two blocks. We are looking south, and you can see the development is primarily to what will be the northwest, the north-northwest. Now that becomes important later. You can also see that we're interpreting the mineralization as a broad sheet at this point in time, and this will come back to a point about the volume estimates. So I'll refer back to this later. We use statistics, geostatistics based on the USBM sampling. We applied a mixture model, a Gaussian mixture model, and we determined that there were essentially a couple of populations within the existing data set, and we used those to determine the upper and lower bounds that we applied in our model. Again, just coming back to this flat line nature, we can see that the mineralization is strata bound, and given that we're dealing with a sedimentary horizon, which is still relatively flat, the ore horizons themselves are relatively flat. They're never more than 5 degrees in dip. We're looking at a 4x3 by 2.4 kilometre footprint, and our ore projection is moving 250 metres back into the canyon walls on either side of the canyon. So that is north and south. So here are the key assumptions for the model. We've assumed a thickness of 3 metres, and that's based on the US Bureau of Mines sampling data. We assumed a density of 2.3 tonnes per metre cubed. That is given that it's a calcareous sandstone host with roughly 1% stibnite in it, maybe 1.5. The grade range that we used is the 0.75 that comes from Dowling's work in 1975 as the lower bound, and the upper bound as 1.5% antimony, which comes from our Gaussian mixture model. The model, in effect, takes the geochemical data, it looks at the populations that are embedded within that data, and it separates out those populations. And we, in fact, found two populations, a higher population and a lower population. And we're focusing around the centroid of those populations. So what you can see here, if we look at the diagram on the right, is that there's plenty of examples of higher grade mineralization within the known mineralization at this point. And one of the key points we must remember is that when the USBM went in to sample these areas, they could only sample where the mineralization was exposed. Where was the mineralization exposed? Well, where they had mined previously. So all of this ore was high graded. The high grade aspect has already been mined, it's been taken out, and all that's left is the lower grade salvages, and that is where they perform their work. So at this point, we say that we think that even at 1.5%, we are underestimating probably a more real grade component. As I said, there was a volume discount of 50%. Dowling applied that 50%. We've done likewise, and I'll explain Dowling in just a moment. Another really important point here is that the work that we've done, that we modelled, the work of Dowling in 1975, focused only on the basal ore horizon. That is the main ore horizon. There's little doubt about that. However, this is a stacked sequence, and there are a number of interbedded sandstone bodies that lie up the sequence, and some of those are also mineralized. Now, we don't have a good handle on those at this point in time, and therefore they're not factored into the model. So here are the limitations in this model. We say that the model is limited to the USGS mapped areas, the green unit, which is our target horizon. And what you can see very quickly is that when you look at this model, areas where they have not interpreted any of our target geology, we don't get any model development. So that's here. Critically, around the Emma mine and Little Emma and the Nevada mines, which is one of the main mines in the camp, there's no contribution from that area to our model. And again, out here on the eastern end, you can see that we've got some mapped unit in green here, which is likely to continue under here, but because it wasn't observed, the USGS, which is the Utah Geological Survey, have not mapped in this area, and therefore there's no apportionment within the model to this area to the east on either flank of the canyon. I just made the comment that the mineralization persists laterally and vertically, and we only considered the basal horizon. We've said that the mineralization on average through the USBM work is 3 meters thick, but we know that some of these zones are well up to 7 meters in thickness, and some are even beyond that and are up to 10 meters. So we don't really have a good sense of what the average thickness may be. It may be greater than 3 meters, and that's really the point here. I've already commented on the historical sampling, which focused around exposed mineralization, which had essentially already been mined. So all we were dealing with was the lower grade core, the lower grade salvage. The higher grade cores were absent. And what that means is that the higher grade zones are likely to be underrepresented in our statistics at this point in time, which could mean that that 1.5% upper bound could in fact be much higher and towards 2%, for example. I discussed the density of the rock. We assumed 2.3 being a calcareous sandstone host, but realistically, once you start to look at higher levels of antimony within that sandstone, the density will also go up, which means that we will get more tons. And I think that a more realistic density lies somewhere between 2.4 to 2.5 tons per meter cubed. So from those points, we believe that you can see that really we've been very conservative with our numbers. Let's have a look at the volumetrics. So as I pointed out much earlier, we used the modelling work done by Craig to help guide our inputs. And we looked at a number of the mapped mine workings by the USGS, and we looked for what were the implications of the model data to our volumetric assumptions. Before I jump into that, I'll step back and go to Dowling. Dowling in 1975 walked the ore horizon right around the canyon, both sides. And what Dowling determined was that 70% of the ore horizon is in fact mineralized, and that a further 20% of it is weakly mineralized. So in other words, when he walked out this ore horizon as exposed within the canyon walls, he recognized that 90% of it is mineralized. And from that, he essentially interpreted that we have a flat sheet, which is probably on an east-west control, and that therefore he assumed that if he looked over an area of 3 mile by 2 mile, which he said equated to 2,500 acres, it converted down to a speculated number of around 70,000 tonne of contained metal. Now, he applied a 50% discount to that. The reason for the 50% discount is fairly obvious. It lies right here in the middle of the canyon. The level of the canyon is below the ore zone, and when you looked at his 3.2 by 2 mile window, essentially 50% of the potential ore had already been stripped out by the development of the canyon and had been moved out via the drainage network that had developed. He saw the continuity being supported by over the 30 known mineral occurrences or mines, adits, that all crop out along the north and south flank. So this was his justification for saying that this is just a sheet of mineralization, and basically yet 50% of it probably still remains in place. I hope that made sense. The basis for our exploration target, though, differs, and it differs because we have a different structural perspective. Instead of saying that the control is primarily east-west, we believe that when you look at the information as mapped by the USGS, which, as I said, we noted at Emma, where we've got exposed mineralisation for over 200-metre lengths, and the Mammoth Mine, which sits at the eastern end on the north flank, we know that there's a north-south drive development which goes 50 metres to the north into the wall, and it terminates in mineralisation. So from that, we've gathered that realistically, a 250-metre projection into the wall on either side is probably quite realistic. So those are the key drivers. And I think you can even look at it being supplemented by the fact that you've got really 4 kilometres of exposed mineralisation within Antimony Canyon. If we're saying that the control is north-south and we swing that around towards Drywash Canyon, where we know we have the same systems developed, then really 250 metres is nothing compared to the potential for 4 kilometres, if not even 10 kilometres of development in the north-south plane, which we know, or we believe, is the main or the principal control on the distribution of the antimony mineralisation within Antimony Canyon. Now, we applied a 50% cut here. So unlike Dowling, where you can explain the 50% by the erosion within the valley, we're just saying that really we know that the north-south structures are controlling distribution of the antimony mineralisation. We don't want to refer to it as a blanket all the way through because we think that that is geologically unrealistic. And so we've applied a conservative 50% to reduce that number down, to bring it down into something that we believe is acceptable. And our task now is to set about showing that that is in fact the case. And we would anticipate the mineralisation to really be concentrated around the margins of these major north-south structures that link all the way through from Antimony Canyon through to Drywash Canyon. And you can see that the numbers also project to the south. And we know that from our work around the Emma mine in particular, that we can see this north-south control in the mineralisation. So we think that that opens up a fantastic opportunity. We think that this is a district scale mineralising system, and that we believe this corridor between Antimony Canyon here on our right and Drywash Canyon on our left, which is actually south and north, we believe that this is a very significant corridor. At this point in time, there is basically no work that's been done beyond the extent of the historical mines here and the exposures here. So we think that this is an amazing opportunity. We need to consider the fact that this is a stacked system. There is the basal horizon, but there are several horizons that exist over and above the basal horizon, which we know are mineralized. We know that these horizons are basically relatively flat. So from a mining development perspective, we can just drive straight in on the mineralization and develop it out. And we are using that as our basis for advancing our maiden JORC SK1300 resource work, which of course we've engaged De Rouge to undertake on our behalf. Just to bring you up to date on where we're currently at, our geophysicists are actually already on the ground. So they arrived and started the field aspect yesterday, or should I say overnight, our time. We've got some bulk sampling work being completed this week by our US-based field team. That work will be submitted to some local laboratories to expedite the results. We have De Rouge heading out there in probably mid-August once the results of the CSAMT survey are known. and they'll use the results of the geophysics to drive their program, which includes geological mapping and some sort of structural analysis. They will review potential drilling locations and drilling access, and then essentially we will put the paperwork in place with the US Forest Services so that we can get in there and commence drilling around the end of this year. And I think that that's pretty much where we're at for now, Andre.
Oh,
And
thanks.
Kristen. Okay,
Thanks,
cheers.
Jono. So we don't always have time for questions during these sessions because we have obviously a limited time frame. But a question did come through from Daniel, requesting an update on our pilot mining. So just maybe a quick update, something I didn't touch on earlier. So what I did say was we're engaging with the local authorities pretty soon, and I've already been in contact with many of them online to set up some meetings. So that'll start taking place soon. So what we need to do and what our planning is about at the moment is just setting up the ideal areas that we're going to be doing, the very small scale pilot mining and processing. Now, if those areas happen to be on patented claims, we don't need permits for those, but we do need to do environmental studies, which is what I mentioned to you earlier. So we're already in contact with local equipment suppliers in the area and in Utah to supply us with equipment for this mining, as well as limited site infrastructure, which we're hoping to set up before winter sets in. Obviously, community engagement is going to be important, and we're going to kick that off in the next couple of weeks or so, talking to the local community. And then we're also working with some local USA companies because we want to try some different and quicker and easier technologies in terms of recovering the ore and beneficiation. So that's just a quick update on the pilot. I see there's a question about geology. I don't know if you want to answer that, John, if you've got time.
Sure. What's the question?
So John, Daniel asks, what evidence is there for the existence of flat-lying lodes other than the primary basal contact lodes?
Well, really the key thing is that the sandstone horizon is interbedded within shales. And at this point in time, the mineralization is almost, and I won't say it's absolutely constrained to the sandstone horizons, the interbedded sandstones. It does push through into the shale horizons, but it is mostly at this point in time from our mapping confined to that sandstone horizon. That sandstone horizon is generally flat. It can run up to 15 degrees, but pretty much everything is flat. And our mineralization, as I said, does cross-cut it, but it is pretty much constrained to that sandstone horizon. So that's the belief, as in these things are flat lodes.
Okay.
The reason why these
Thanks,
things are flat
John.
lodes. Yeah.
And then lastly, there was just a quick question about mining method. It's a bit early to say what our mining method is going to be. Obviously, we're going to do things with the least disturbance on the environment, and obviously economics will drive that as well. But probably the most important is just geotechnical. Yeah, what does the actual rocks look like in terms of being underground and how we're going to mine it. So we can't make a decision whether it's going to be open pit or underground or a combination of both, but that'll come out when we do our technical work and our feasibility study.
Well, thank you, Andre. Thank you, Jonathan. That's all we have time for today. Thanks everyone online for joining us. A recording of this webinar will be made available later this afternoon. Otherwise, you can look at the website www.trigg.com.au, and the webinar will be uploaded there as well later today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kristen. Cheers.